This is Steve Solot from LATC, Latin American Training Center, and I would like to welcome you to this third LATC webinar, which is entitled Post-COVID Audiovisual Public Policy Challenges in Latin America. This third webinar is aimed at our promotion of the publication of the audiovisual public policy landscape in Latin America, which is a free download available from the LATC site, and we will include the link in the chat. So if anyone does not have the book, they can obtain it free at any time. Quickly, just to explain how we're going to conduct this webinar, I want to reinforce the fact that this webinar, unlike the previous ones, will be entirely in English. The webinar is being recorded so that you may access it later at the YouTube site of LATC. And the questions that you may have may be submitted in Spanish, Portuguese, or English, and we will translate them for the panelists to respond at the end of the webinar during our question and answer period. What we will do in the first part of the webinar is allow each of the panelists to make their presentation on the topic. Again, the topic is the post-COVID audiovisual public policy challenges in Latin America. Each speaker will have 10 minutes to make their presentation, and we will hold the questions until the end. After their presentations, after the 4 presentations, we will have a segment of questions that I will present to the panelists for 20 minutes. And then after that section, we will have a 20-minute Q&A, questions and answers from you all who are attending the webinar. Those questions can be submitted in the chat, and I will receive them and then transmit them to the panelists. They may be to the entire group or individually, and you can specify that as we progress. Now, I would like to go ahead and introduce each of our panelists, our illustrious panelists for this webinar. Jonathan Olsberg is a film industry veteran who, as executive chair of Olsberg SPI, heads one of the world's leading specialist consultancies that advise private and public sector global clients on strategies for successful growth. He has also been a producer and distributor of film and television content. His first career was in finance on Wall Street and in the City of London for the British merchant bank Hill Samuel. Alexander Cuntz heads the Creative Economy section at the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Before joining WIPO, he worked as a senior policy advisor at the Berlin-based Federal Expert Commission for Research and Innovation, and as a research consultant at the European Commission. Mr. Cuntz's economic research focuses on the economic role of copyright and the impact of digitization. Mr. Cuntz holds a PhD in innovation economics. Silvia Echeverri is a director of the Colombian Film Commission since 2008. And she is a board member of the World Association of Film Commissions in Los Angeles, the Associations of Film Commissions International. She is an economist with a degree from the Universidad de los Andes and a master degree in economic law from the Universidad Javeriana. Mrs. Echeverri led the process for the approval of Law 1556 in the Colombian Congress with the support of the Ministry of Culture and the Ministry of Commerce, Industry, and Tourism. Giancarlo Nasi is a film producer with more than 10 feature films in his career. which have been presented and awarded at the main film festivals around the world, such as Cannes, Venice, and Berlin. He is the founder and current president of the Chilean Film Academy and vice president of the Ibero-American Federation of Film Academies of Arts and Sciences, FIACINE. The launch of the book that I referred to previously, The Audiovisual Public Policy Landscape in Latin America, is the second stage of a new focus by Olsberg SPI on Latin America, following the launch of the Public Policy Audiovisual Diagnostic Consultation, which is a free 1-hour consultation for public sector entities in Latin America. Please visit the Olsberg website to obtain more information about this process, which is open for another month till the end of June. The Latin American Training Center is based in Rio de Janeiro. It is a media training and consulting center for professionals of audiovisual content industry, providing technical training and support through programs, publications, workshops, and seminars. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and proceed with our first speaker, who will be Jonathan Olsberg.
Hello, everybody from London. It's very good to meet you all, and thank you, Steve, for those introductory remarks and for the invitation to be involved in this very interesting webinar. I'm going to share a presentation that I'm going to take you through for 5 or 10 minutes. And this is, we put this together specifically for this particular meeting, but it refers to some reports we've written over the last year. And if you're interested in the reports, or indeed any of the reports that we've written on a variety of topics, they'll be on our website, and our website information will be on the last slide here. We are an international strategy consultancy working in the audiovisual sector for governments and major corporates around the world. And we're delighted that we now have a link into Latin America through our relationship with Steve Solot, which started earlier this year. Okay, so this is, first of all, a very brief word about ourselves. I've explained that we're a creative industries consultancy specializing in your sector. And these are some of our clients, not all of them, but they include the MPA, Osfilm, Inter-American Development Bank, the BFI, etc. Most of our clients, I would say 2/3 of our clients are public bodies, governments around the world who are interested in this sector. This slide summarizes something that we wrote about in the book that Steve mentioned, which is essentially about building a holistic screen strategy for any particular country or region. And I'll come on later to specific issues relating to COVID, but the background to public strategy, in our view, could involve these 5 pillars of areas of focus: national, international, infrastructure, culture, and then organization and regulation. I won't go through this in detail. In the book, in Steve's book, in Steve's publication, there is a chapter on this, but basically we consider that any holistic, all-encompassing strategy for the growth of the screen sector, the audiovisual sector, needs to address these various areas. So for example, in terms of national strategies, it could be discretionary funds for development or production. International, obviously, often involves a film commission, co-production treaties, perhaps, and export support. Infrastructure, we're dealing with issues, major problems these days in the global production scene, studios, sound stages, workforce, crew, etc. Cultural issues regarding film education, audience development, possibly festivals. And then the other area of strategy that often sometimes gets forgotten is how to most effectively regulate this industry and collect data on the industry. So that's a little bit about overall sector strategy. We've published a report last year for AFSI, the Association of Film Commissioners International, about best practice in public policy for the development of these industries. And this page just focuses on 4 particular areas where we think best practice is really important. And that's most for a country or for a region. And that is the issue of incentives, what the issues around workforce capacity, issues around infrastructure and services. I mentioned studios just before. And finally, very importantly, a film-friendly production environment. Those of you who are involved in film commissions will recognize all of these as important areas of best practice. There can be formal areas of best practice regarding these in terms of particular legislation and regulations or policies to increase capacity and quality. But there are informal areas of best practice, particularly in film friendliness, where it's very much about building relationships with filmmakers who are making content in the country or region concerned. Moving on, another area that is becoming increasingly important is making sure governments understand the benefits to the public, to the nation, of having a thriving screen production sector. And I'm mostly talking about production issues rather than distribution or exhibition or anything else. And here again, talking mostly about scripted features, scripted television, documentary, etc. And these are the typical benefits one can find around that emanate from a healthy audiovisual sector. And these are the reasons why governments are interested in supporting and investing in the sector. First of all, there are the standard measures of macroeconomic activity where governments compare one industry with another based on gross domestic product or gross value added. Then it's about employment, about the jobs that are to be found in the sector. And our sector has very highly skilled and productive jobs, and also jobs that we call them jobs of the future, which is to say, these are jobs that are less at risk from being replaced by robotics or AI. And this is something that resonates very well with many governments that are interested in creating more jobs in a country or a region. Another benefit to measure is net inward investment, particularly for a country or region that is hosting international productions. Maybe there's an incentive that provides a percent of the cost locally, 25, 30% or something. But that means that quite often the remaining 70 or 75% is coming into the country from outside. So incentives often act as a great lever for inward investment. A healthy industry with a healthy support system often encourages private sector capital investment in infrastructure and the supply chain, in studios, in post-production, VFX, equipment, etc. And that sort of is another way in which public money invested in the sector can leverage private capital and private investment coming in from outside. Then there are some other sort of softer issues that are less quantitative, but are very, very important nevertheless. There's these two are sort of linked, which is to say the film and TV tourism. So individuals, consumers who experience the stories of a country, its people, its locations, its heritage, become very interested and often are interested in coming over to be tourists in the country concerned, an increasingly important aspect of economic value of our industry. Linked to that are also the positive messages about the nation and its people that these entertainment pieces of content deliver, sometimes referred to as soft power on a geopolitical level, but also very, very valuable in terms of trade relationships. And finally, something we're going to come on to in another slide, an economic benefit of this industry specifically is how it spends money and drives activity in other adjacent creative industries and other business areas. Let me move on to a slide that talks more about this. And this is particularly important in a post-COVID environment. One of the reports on our website is looked at how global screen production has been a driver of economic activity in a COVID environment and helps economies suffering from COVID in recovery. And it's because of two things. One is when a production lands in a country or a region, it often spends a lot of money very quickly. This is unusual. Most other industries spend money much more slowly. But with a major production or even a more modest size one, in a period of anything from 4 to 12 weeks, a lot of money is spent in the economy. So there's a tremendous economic boost, almost like an adrenaline hit, if you like, coming into the economy. But the other thing about our industry, which is relatively unique, is how the money that we spent lands in other business sectors. Research that we've done in this report that I mentioned, you'll find on our website, has identified that of all the productions we examine, different types of productions of different sizes and different genres, roughly 2/3 on average of below the line production costs are spent in other business sectors than screen production specific. And these other sectors are often sectors that have suffered terribly from COVID. So travel and transport, for example, and hospitality and catering, significant amounts of money spent in these areas that help. And of course, the whole industry is used to employing lots of freelance workers. And again, during COVID, freelance employment has been hit very hard. So that's just addressing a few things that we think might be useful. That's the address of our website on the bottom there, www.o-spi.com. We have an area on the website that has all of our reports, and you'll find many of the topics that I've covered will be found in those reports. So that's it from me. Very happy and looking forward to answering questions if you want later on.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Jonathan. And we're going to be holding but we have some questions. We're going to be holding the questions till later in the segment. And now we're going to turn it over to Alexander for his presentation. Please, Alexander, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you for the presentation as well. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to Latin America. We're further down the road on this day. My name is Alexander Cuntz, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel. I lead WIPO's economic research on the creative economy. And one of the studies that Steve just mentioned, contribution studies, that's really the way we've been doing, supporting member states in their endeavor to support their creative economies. Now we're taking this to basically another level and try to be more ambitious in actually identifying what regulation works well, what is the type of regulatory environment that can really support film production and kind of audiovisual, the whole audiovisual sector. So that's basically the ambition we have with our research program. Today I'm going to present you one of these pieces we released recently, and kind of the new format that we developed for that is the Creative Economy Notes, which is basically we try to do to basically summarize our findings from more technical reports and make them more digestible for those interested. I noticed also from looking at the other webinars that Steve has been hosting, that this may be also felt by many a time of crisis actually in the creative economy. And so maybe that the study I'll present to you today may feel even historic a bit because it's pre-pandemic, even if we're now entering maybe post-pandemic times in some places of the world. I hope it's still highly relevant, and the information and the insights we develop in that study are still important for the industry. Let me also mention that we're in that series of creative economy research. We're also looking into things like the pandemic impact on creators in audiovisual sectors, but also beyond. So that's also we see that this may be even more urgent to look at, I think. Still, let me, as always, I put a disclaimer here. This is not an official WIPO opinion, nor is it necessarily the view of our member states. We nevertheless hope it supports their work, their policy work. And let me also mention it's co-authored research with my colleague, Kyle Bergquist. So what have we been looking at in this particular piece of research on the audiovisual sector in Brazil? And in particular, when we looked at online distribution on platforms. The starting observation really was that online content markets in Brazil, they, in particular, the subscription ones, grew more fragmented over time. And I mean fragmented in a sense that goes beyond the standard windowing strategies that are typically done in the industry. The impression was from looking at thousands of data points in the last decade was that actually increasingly movie titles would be distributed more exclusively on an individual or single platform rather than hosting them on a number of different platforms. And that was really the starting observation. One reason how we explain this is basically that I think that's the way maybe most of the platforms compete with each other. It's really by being different in terms of their catalogs. As an alternative, they could be different in their ability to predict what consumers want to watch, to be better outperforming other platforms in the quality of their predictions. But it's, I think, one argument we make in this study is that it's really the way they compete, providing the most exclusive content. This doesn't necessarily, from a public policy perspective, this doesn't need to be a problem. But one test that we want to do, and that's how we start off, that's our first research question really, is it may be that consumers are now, they may have a harder time to actually access their favorite content because they would need to subscribe. If they want to access it legally, they need to subscribe to a number of platforms with more fragmentation in consumer markets. So the working hypothesis really is that increasingly it may be that consumers with more market fragmentation, they may look for other sources, for alternative sources, and this also includes illegal sources of illegal content to access their content they wish. So that's really our first question. And the short answer is really, unfortunately, more fragmentation is really linked to more piracy on an individual movie title level. So we can do that very, very precisely, very fine-tuned. And the way we measure this is basically we look at the effect on piracy searches on Google when titles become available on a platform, or if they become available on multiple platforms. So we can tease out that effect on search. And what we find is basically that once a title becomes available at all on a single platform, we see a 6% decline in piracy searches that people do. When a title, now comes the interesting and really the new part, when titles become available on a number of platforms, say 4 platforms, there's an impressive drop in Google searches by close to 15%. So that's basically our key finding, and it's in a sense interesting to see that if stakeholders take into account that greater availability across platforms may be helpful in channeling back some consumers into using legal sources again, which is of course what the industry can benefit from. And the second question we looked at is basically whether this market fragmentation, or put differently, greater content exclusivity on average, is actually something that leverages new content, because that could be something good, right? It could be something that implicitly helps the supply of new movies, and it may make them, and greater investment may lead to higher quality movies at the end of the day. So that's maybe very good things. But the issue is that actually we cannot, across all segments, we don't find that it is helpful for additional investment. So that test does not always, it is not always met in a sense. So our understanding of what is actually happening in the market is that once platforms are pushing some content providers to actually host stuff more exclusively, it may be that they're missing out on potential distribution money. So it may be that what typically distributors would have paid in advance for a production is now suddenly not available anymore, because it's really contracting to a single platform. That's basically the argument we see behind it. Finally, I think that's our two main findings, and I hope we have an interesting panel discussion. Thank you.
Alex, thank you very much. And we will have several questions to address some of those topics regarding regulation of VOD, which is, of course, not only an important issue for Latin America, but worldwide, and it's a hot topic. So we'll get back to that topic very soon in the questions and answers. And now we'll turn it over to Silvia from Colombia. Por favor, Silvia.
Yeah, well, good morning. Thank you very much, Steve, for this invitation. As you told the audience, I'm the head of the Film Commission in Colombia. And the Film Commission in Colombia is part of a bigger entity called ProImágenes Colombia. That's the entity that supports and promotes audiovisual in the country, hand by hand with the Ministry of Culture. So I'm going to share my presentation. So are you seeing it there? Okay. Perfect. So I wanted to show you all what are the instruments that Colombia has today and that have been managed for several years and developed for several years. As Jonathan was explaining us, this must be a system. It's like the legs on a chair. You need the whole thing to work in order to get a development of a film sector in a country. So in Colombia, we started with the FDC, the Cinematographic Development Fund, which is a fund developed by ProImágenes Colombia. This fund receives its resources from the Colombian box office. So exhibitors, distributors, and Colombian film producers have to pay a percentage of their box office income to this fund. The FDC, that's administered by ProImágenes Colombia, awards yearly non-replayable grants to the Colombian applicants presenting Colombian film projects in every stage. So that would be script writing, production of documentaries, of animation, of fiction, post-production. So several stages are contemplated on the grants. We also have, since 2004, and the FDC comes back to 2004 as well, a tax shelter for Colombian investors and donors of Colombian films. So besides those grants that Colombian filmmakers can get from that fund, they can finance their films through this tax shelter. So these tax shelters allows 165% of the amount invested or donated to be deducted from the gross income on an income tax declaration. This way, the investor or donor gets back through this mechanism 34% of their investment on Colombian film production or co-production. So this radically lowers the risk of the investment on the Colombian films. Since 2013 to 2012, we also start to develop an incentive to bring international productions of films to Colombia. So the Film Fund FFC Rebate was created, and it still exists. So this FFC is a cash rebate equivalent to 40% of the money spent on audiovisual services and 20% of money spent on logistical services, hotels, catering, and transportation, hired from Colombian natural or legal persons. The FFC funds is allocated each year from the Colombian government's general budget. So this has been an instrument that has been quite successful, bringing international production to our country. And since last year, the Colombian government created a new instrument that not only goes to film, but goes to all of audiovisual. Before, we just have mechanisms to support films that came to our country, but not TV series or other audiovisual. So the Colombian government created the CINE, that's a tax rebate with a value equal to 35% on the money spent on audiovisual, on services hired from Colombia on audiovisual. This includes, of course, hotels, catering, and transportation, besides labor and every other service needed to be hired to make a film in Colombia. These CINEs are marketable on the stock exchange, and the maximum amount that can be awarded through the CINEs is set each year by the Film Promotion Committee. For this year, 2021, it's quite high. It's around $51 million. So with these instruments, we were doing quite well, as you see, till 2019. So these are the attendees, tickets sold in Colombia. So we were growing since 2010 at a very rapid pace, and we got to 73.1 attendees sold in Colombia. Of course, this rapidly dropped in 2020, and it dropped to 12.6 million attendees. Of course, this has an impact in the box office. So we passed from a Colombian box office of $165 million to 29.6 million in 2020. This is an index that we always look at, and it was very low in Colombia. This index is attendees towards total population in Colombia. So this means of the number of Colombia in a year, how many times they go to the cinema. So we went over one from 2015 onwards, and kept growing. And this figure, of course, again dropped in 2020 because of the pandemic. And of course, as I told you, as the FDC is a collection of the box office of the Colombian box office, the collection of the FDC also dropped radically, with, of course, impacts the grants that that fund can give to the Colombian filmmakers. This is very concerning, because as I was telling you, we need to support all the system, and that's what Jonathan was saying as well. We need to have a system that not only brings international production to a country, but we need to support the local filmmakers. making. So this needs to be addressed quickly. This year, the government supported these funds with other money different than the collection that we have from the box office, and it gave this fund $1.5 million. Of course, it's an important figure, but it does not compensate the collection that was made of the Colombian box office. This is also the figure of the tax shelters for Colombian investors in Colombian films, which also dropped in 2020. So both systems dropped radically last year. Not everything was bad, because the CINA and the FFC incentives that were created in the middle of the pandemic did drive international production to come to the country. And it's very interesting that especially on the TV series that are getting these grants, they are being financed by the platforms abroad, but they're Colombian content 100%. So the script writers are Colombian, the directors, the producers, the actors. So it's a way to support the Colombian audiovisual production through getting the interest of foreign investors on our audiovisual production. So the FFC last year approved 4 projects, a feature film, a TV movie, and 2 series. Those are getting a big impact in employment. So they're going to have, they're going to employ 305 direct jobs. These are not indirect jobs, but direct jobs that we will get. And they will be spending in Colombia $13.5 million. With the CINA, which is the tax rebate, we approved 13 projects. It was 1 feature films, 9 series, and 3 realities. This is going to generate 1,682 direct employments besides the indirect employments, and it would bring an expenditure in Colombia of $62.1 million. So these incentives are bringing back to Colombia $75.6 million. So I did this little chart to see what can we do, and I have more questions than answers. We need to get the attendees back to the cinemas in Colombia soon in order to get this system to work again. The question or the downside is, how are we going to do this at a rapid pace? The other strategy we can address is getting public resources from the Colombian national budget to feed the FDC. But of course, after the pandemic, the Colombian economy is having major struggles and major needs. There's also these initiatives or ideas to issue laws that tax platforms. The downside of that is that could drive away the foreign investment of those platforms in the country, which are very important. There's also things that we could do, like through legal initiatives, direct the VAT charge to the platforms towards the local audiovisual production. But again, the resources are needed for other purposes because of the economy and the struggles of the Colombian economy, such as social needs. As you may have heard in the news, there's a big social discomfort in Colombia, so a lot of resources must be directed towards education and health and other stuff people are needing. Of course, we need to maintain the FFC cash rebate. The bad thing with this cash rebate is that resources are very limited, and after the pandemic, the Colombian economy again is having struggles, so it will be more difficult to get the government to feed this fund for the cash rebate. And we need to maintain the tax rebate. I don't feel this any downside on this maintaining of the Colombian tax rebate. But of course, we need to communicate the impact on the collection of income taxes that is compensated by new collection generated by new income of Colombian taxpayers. This is the thing called as ROI, return on investment, which we're starting to measure and to communicate in order for the Colombian people knowing that it's not giving money to some specific sector. And as Jonathan was explaining to us, this brings money to sectors different than audiovisual, of course, generates new collection of taxes which go to the national budget. So this is my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Silvia, thank you for the excellent presentation and for the questions and answers at the end. We will return to some of those questions. We already have some questions about the incentives in Colombia through the chat, and so we will come back to that. And now we'll turn to Giancarlo for the last individual speaker presentation. Please, Giancarlo.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the invitation, Steve. So yes, as Steve was saying, I am the Vice President of the Federation of Film Academies in Ibero-America, so all the whole Latin America plus Portugal and Spain. And as Academies, as you may know, we represent every filmmaker, not only producers, directors, or scriptwriters, but also DOP, music composers. We try, I mean, our main goal and our DNA is to be as diverse and as representative as we can be. So in this federation, we represent 12 academies from different countries. So more than 7,000 Academy members around the region. We promote filmmakers and we promote films, and this is why diversity it's in our DNA, because we need to promote every filmmaker and every film. Okay, so that's why we, of course, we're not blind in front of the things that are happening in the world right now, the debates that we filmmakers are having. So filmmakers, we are definitely rethinking, questioning ourselves, what we are doing, what kind of stories we're telling, and also questioning the history of our films. I think it's something that it's important. I think it's something that is very healthy, and this is why also we are very we're very interested by what is happening in the Golden Globes right now, also what happened in the Oscars and how the Oscars also started to change fundamentally and put like very important changes in their organization so they could be more representative and inclusive. So this word diversity is very interesting that they invite us to talk about it, because it's something that has been raised as a collective goal. I mean, it's a word that we have been listening a lot. This goal is to foster inclusion, not only among creators, but only among the stories that we are telling as filmmakers and in audiovisual content. So in Latin America, we can focus our debate in 3 groups. Of course, gender inequality, women, then the LGBT+ community, and which is something very important in Latin America, is the indigenous communities, Afro-descendants, and immigrants and their descendants. Okay, so what is very dramatic in Latin America is that these are not minorities. In some countries, indigenous people are the majoritarian demographic group. We all know that women are majoritarian in almost every country in the world. So this is why it's so important. So in economical terms, if you see diversity, the term diversity, it's antonym, it's contrary, it's opposite, it's lack of access, monopoly, and inequality. In political terms, it's opposite, it's exclusion. So we definitely do not want that inequality and exclusion to be the concepts that define our industry, the concept that guide our industry. On the contrary. So in this term, this goal, this quest for more diversity has an economical side. it was very interesting to listen and to read Jonathan Olsberg in this book when he says that filmmaking, it's also about creating highly skilled, productive employment jobs that are less threatened by robotics and AI, what you said now, the jobs of the future. So that's exactly the kind of jobs we need to give to these groups that have been historically left behind. We need to bring these groups into our economic system. We need to include this as labor force. So this is not only something that can be called ideological or political or symbolic, but it's also something economic that not only is important for filmmakers and for the film industry, but it's important for the economy as a whole. And then, of course, we have the political side. The struggle is to make every story visible, to bring those invisibilized stories into the spotlight. So because we know that audiovisual films and audiovisual content are a massive agent of socialization, especially now that we are so hyper visualization of the society. So it is an agent of socialization that constructs stereotypes, but also can demolish them and can demolish structural inequalities. And this is a region that is plagued by inequality. Okay, so of course the role of the culture, the role of producers, filmmakers, and every artist is, of course, to question and fight against inequality, against some privileges that are not fair, and defend our democracy. I think it was very clear when we saw the social uprising in Chile, now maybe the situation in Colombia and in many other places, that inequality is something that is a threat to our fragile democracies. So this is why queer cinema, feminist cinema, and indigenous cinema are fundamental in order to deconstruct hierarchical behaviors, in order to deconstruct fixed identities, and to challenge any structural inequality or system that may want to annul any dissident stance. Okay, so we as generators of audiovisual content, we of course synthesize power clashes, and this is why diversity is fundamental. We can, I mean, it's just an example, indigenous groups. I mean, nowadays we know that indigenous groups, they are fighting and getting more and more representation in politics. I mean, here in Chile, they will have their own quotas in the new convention that will write the new constitution. And so it's clear, this is clearly something that it's a political issue around the world, in Latin America, and film has to also be part of it. I mean, indigenous people have been homogenized, reduced to stereotype habits and characteristics in films towards our history. And well, I mean, it's important now to understand that we can reread our film history to see how important the colonization point of view affected our films, and also to be able to bring them and give them the voice they need. Okay, so this is why we applaud as FIACINE some initiatives like the CAASI, the Conference of Film Institutes in Latin America and Ibero-America, that they declared now their commitment to promote native languages. Okay. So we also need to understand that this struggle, or this all the efforts towards more diversity in the film industry in Latin America, they have to be seen in both sides of the cinematographic process. So yes, in production, support these groups, underrepresented group, to be part of productions, both in front and behind the cameras. But also we need to think about distribution. This is fundamental. I mean, we need to get our films and our audiovisual content to those communities. Okay, so there was something very interesting. If we take the example of the United States, and here I will just share my screen just for to show some very quick data. In the United States, the consulting firm McKinsey, they did a very interesting report this year in March, where they showed that if we had more racially diverse film and TV projects, people, consumers, might spend as much as $10 billion more, okay, 7% more. This means like, so the industry could grow 7%, 10 billion more if the projects were more racially diverse. We need to understand that in the States, according to McKinsey and Company, the Black-led projects receive in average 40% less financing, but at the same time they make 10% more in box office revenue per dollar invested. Okay, so these are clearly Black-led projects. They have been underfunded. They have been undervalued, despite providing a better return on investment, a better ROI. Okay, so this clearly it would be very interesting to apply this logic to Latin America. I mean, just to think in Latin America, we know that we have a 51% population women that represents more than 300 million people, and Afro-Latinos, they represent more than 37 million people in Latin America. But the numbers are not very encouraging yet. I mean, Argentina, the INCA, the Argentinian Institute of Film, they just released a report where they show that in the last decade, 1,622 films were made in Argentina, and only 220 were directed by women. So a little bit more than 10% when directed by women. This is, of course, quite dramatic. There's still something that needs to be done, and also understanding that opening films and audiovisual creation to these underrepresented groups means also arriving to new audiences, and that can be something very interesting for our film industry to grow. Okay, but well, good things have been done. If we think about this, some symbolic moments have been very important. I'm part of the LGBT plus community, and I know that seeing Daniela Vega in the Oscars being the first transgender woman to present an award in the Oscar ceremony was something that was amazingly important, not only for LGBT filmmakers, but for LGBT communities around the world. This year in FIACINE, we are extremely happy that half of the films that were selected to represent Latin America for the best international feature film at the Oscars were directed by women. So Latin America sent 18 films to represent different countries. 9 of them when they were directed by women. One of them was nominated for best documentary. So I mean, we have done some advances. We are getting better and better, but there's still a lot to be done. As FIACINE, what we think is that we need to have the debate. We need to debate about positive action. We need to debate about actors' representation of other or different underrepresented community. Whatever is your point of view personally and in terms of institutionally, the important thing is to debate. So yes, our call is to embrace this debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giancarlo. Excellent points that you have made, and we do need to address this issue right away. We're going to come back to that in some of the chat questions specifically for you on that subject. But before we do that, we're going to turn to the next segment, which is the part where I will ask the panelists some specific questions. And I want to remind the panelists that they're free also to comment on other topics that have been raised by their fellow colleagues, fellow panelists, if they wish. So I'm going to begin. We have several very important topics to discuss, but I want to make sure that we cover some of them that have been raised. I want to start with Jonathan because there is a a lack of understanding in Latin America, at least, and perhaps in other regions, about the benefits of the economic impact of the industry. And one of the slides, Jonathan, that you showed was very revealing, which showed that 67% of the expenses of the spend by productions on average actually impact outside of the production of the film or content production itself. What do you think is the best way to approach governments, public policymakers, to get them to understand how the audiovisual sector really can be an engine for economic development and growth?
Thank you very much, Steve, for that question. And in fact, the topic is relevant also to the main topic of this webinar, which is about post-COVID, the post-COVID world and recovery. I'll answer your question in a minute, but I was thinking about which countries around the world have done very well, strangely enough, in which countries has our industry done very well in helping recover from COVID. And I thought, I mean, there are several countries, but I was looking at Australia and New Zealand in particular, and why they were able to do so well and get so much production off the ground. I mean, there are a few reasons for that. One is both countries had very strict constraints and regulation on incoming travel, which has been very effective. But both countries, so their response to COVID in general in both countries has been strong, especially in relation to stopping people coming into those countries. But it's very interesting to note that in both cases, the countries made special arrangements and gave special dispensations to film production workers coming into the country. And that's because they already understood when COVID hit, these are countries that already understood the economic value, the macro and microeconomic value of our industry. And I say macro and micro because, you know, governments deal with both measurements of macroeconomic benefits, like I described, gross value added per the nation, numbers of jobs, etc. But the micro benefits, such as the one you mentioned, are becoming more and more important because they're very real. When you talk to a government minister about our industry and how it delivers such value economically, and you show them that pie chart or other charts that explain of the total budget, 2/3 goes into other industries, and typically 7% of that goes into travel. 8% goes into hospitality and catering. Another 3% goes into health and safety and security. 16% into construction or whatever it may be. Then they start to understand really, almost that they can touch and feel the impact. Whereas when you talk to them about GVA or, return on investment or multipliers, it becomes a vague and rather ephemeral discussion. Coming back to answering your question, another reason why Australia and New Zealand did so well and responded so quickly is because governments there already understood the economic benefits that I was talking about in the youth range. And that's because either they themselves did the work and did the homework and did the analysis, the economic impact studies that they commissioned or that they did themselves internally, that spelt out and actually quantified in hard terms evidence of these benefits. Or if it wasn't the government, then industry bodies, such as in Australia, the local branch of the MPA commissioned 2 studies. We did them both, as it happens, but 2 studies over a period of a couple of years, looking at the economic benefits generated by their incentives and by the industry as a whole. So when COVID hit, these governments were already on message, if you like. You didn't have to try and convince them, no, don't spend that money, don't invest as much in housing or in pensions or in social security Some of that money invested in screen production gives you huge benefits, generates revenue to the Treasury, then can be spent on those areas. So I think that the sort of long-term awareness within government of the benefits of these industries based on evidence, hard quantitative evidence, is one of the most potent things to have if you're trying to have a discussion with government during COVID or at other times about why investment in our industry is so important, usually through incentives or other measures. And I just want to say, I'm using the word investment and very deliberately not using a word that's often used for this, which is subsidy. The use of the word subsidy is an echo of decades ago when support for our industry came through the cultural agenda. Now that the support comes from governments both culturally and economically, it's really important for governments to be persuaded to think of the measures of support, like an incentive or other measures, is an investment, and that's because there's a return. It's not a subsidy, it's not a handout, it's very sound economic policy.
Okay, very good comments. And I think it's also important to point out that some policymakers around the world did take advantage of the pandemic period when things were slowing down to exactly use the audiovisual industry to bolster their economies by preparing for the recovery. As you mentioned, Australia was one of the examples, but there are other countries like Greece and Spain that actually implemented or increased their incentives. The case of Colombia, as we know, is a bit different, although FIACINE was announced during just prior to the pandemic. It was already in development before the COVID crisis hit. But there are other Latin American countries that are studying right now the ways and means to increase or to implement an investment or a type of incentive to use their local industries to improve economic development and job creation. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but before that, let me ask Alex specifically, what do the findings from the original WIPO study suggest in terms of public policy?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I apologize. It's a bit disconnect, actually, I think, from the discussion that we're having at that point. But I hope it's okay if I add that still.
Yes, please.
To the overall puzzle. I think the two main takeaways that we had in that specific study on online distribution in Brazil was really that we found, or we saw really confirmed, that availability across platforms could be even a meaningful alternative instrument for enforcement in the online environment. So that's really something that came out of that study. And that basically, from a policy perspective, what we're suggesting is basically now that I think there is value in really focusing on what stops availability in that context, in that sense that what kind of institutionally speaking stops the content provider to actually get the stuff on the platform. What are the barriers, or why is the cost too high to actually to get it there? So that's really something that whatever factors and whatever role policies can play in that availability question, it's really the key outcome and the key implication that we see from a policy perspective. Second point I wanted to raise, that it seems based on the claim we make, what the impact of platforms and the specific competition between platforms seems to have on content exclusivity and content investment in some segments is really something that may suggest to policies, again, to better coordinate competitive policies and copyright policies in the first place, because these things seem very tightly tied together in some ways there. And finally, if I may, I want to showcase also and highlight the work my other colleagues at WIPO are doing as part of this project. There was not just an economic study, but there were legal studies, and they're soon to be published as well. So legal reports for Latin America, and very interesting. I find very interesting case studies on contractual practices in the industry and the practices of independent producers in the audiovisual sectors. So that should be coming forward soon on the WIPO web page and the CIP web page. I want to highlight that as well and recommend to everyone for reading. Yeah, I'm very excited to hear more from you on the panel. It's very interesting, and thank you for joining.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Let me now turn to Silvia. We have a specific question for Silvia, but before that, I want to mention that Colombia, as many of you know, was already a case study in terms of the cash rebate incentive, which was passed quite a while ago, and has it been even more popular with the new transferable tax credit, the SINA. And this is a rather sophisticated type of incentive for Latin America, at least. It's very well known in the US, but it is a bit sophisticated in terms of its application to financial markets in Latin America. So one question for Silvia is, do you think that this is a type of mechanism which is possible to implement in other countries, or is it too sophisticated for the average incentive? And also, at the same time, I want to address one question specifically on VOD from Rafael Tejas, which is, do incentives in Colombia also apply to VOD only distribution? For example, productions that would be distributed only through a streaming service like Netflix. Can you, Silvia, please respond to both of those questions?
Sure, Steve, thank you for those questions. So your first question, of course, I think that other countries in Latin America can implement this incentive. All of the financial markets in our country are very sophisticated. We all got banking systems that work very well. We've all got stock exchanges. It's only that we need to put both things together, because usually in our countries, it's like the people who work in culture and on audiovisual and on films do not know about economics and do not talk with people on the financial sector. We're kind of different people. But when you get a system that connects both, I think you can be very successful. This is very new. The SINA is very new in Colombia, and we need to do a work in order to let the people in the financial sector and on the stock exchange understand how does it work and how they can benefit from that. And we're starting to work on that, of course, because the most important thing that we need to achieve is to get a market, a big market, to get investors around Colombia to buy those SINAs, because if we do not get people to buy the SINAs, then the whole system will collapse. Fortunately, we are getting interest from the banks, from the investors, and because there's an economic benefit that they can immediately see. On the second question on the BOD, it does apply, of course. The SINA and the FC apply to products that go directly to any platforms. You need to show your product in some way. It's not like you can put it underneath your table, but it doesn't need to be a screen, a movie screen.
Okay, thank you, Silvia. I think that answered very clearly the question. And now I'd like to turn to Giancarlo. And the question that I have is regarding FIACINE, the Federation of Film Academies in Ibero-America, and its role beyond diversity and inclusion. Does FIACINE have an active role in regulatory issues or in issues related to public policy in Latin America? And also at the same time, a question about diversity and inclusion. We see in Latin America many initiatives in the past year or so which try to ensure inclusion and diversity of different groups. And in a way, a lot of us are shocked by what is happening with the Hollywood Foreign Press Association and the Golden Globes, because this is a scandal all of a sudden in the US. And it's as if the US is only now waking up to something like this. Do you think there is a way to make sure that policymakers include a legislation to ensure inclusion and diversity in Latin America?
Yes, well, in FIACINE, I must say that we are a relatively young organization. So we've been created we were created 3 years ago. What we do is like we mainly, since we represent all the academies, we try to mediate between policymakers and other organizations. So we are actually trying to right now to work very profoundly into the inclusion of women. So we have several projects called FIACINE Mujeres. We're working on a directory of all the members academy, female members academy that want to work in other countries. So we're trying to put together our 7,000 members in order to create more collaboration. And in that case, of course, we are focusing mainly into the women inclusion and women collaboration between our academies. So that's something very important. Then, of course, we're starting to talk with CASI, with different other organizations, with producers organizations also in our countries, so we can really push forward some public policies or other initiatives in order to enhance diversity and inclusion of underrepresented groups. So yes, that is in our DNA. We're working on that. I hope it works. I hope we're more and more we have more and more results. But I think that the most important thing is that we all work together. It's been amazing to see, like every time we talk to whether it's a public institution or a private organization or even a multilateral organization, the goals are the same. So it's just we really need to organize and get things done. And then yes, I mean, I think about the Golden Globe scandal, I think we're going to be quite sincere. We need to be very careful that we don't have our own scandal. I think it's very easy to look at the United States and say, oh, look what happened there. But we need to understand that in Latin America, things are not very much better. I think we do have a problem by including indigenous groups and Afro-descendant groups and immigrants group in our filmmaking, even in the not only in the creation, in distribution, but also in the way we design our film public policies. So for me, it's a red flag. It's to say like we could totally have our own scandal in Latin America. So that's why it's so important that we address this issue right now.
Okay, thank you. Very good. I want to now just open it up a little bit to the entire panel, and I want to ask a little bit more difficult question, because now not just in Latin America, but all over the world, we are in the middle of the streaming war, the competition of the streaming services, which every day is growing. And one of the challenges, and this is nothing new, but does need to be addressed, is how to ensure local content is displayed, is shown, is acquired, and is distributed by the streaming services. Different countries and different regions are attempting to address it. As you know, there is a 30% quota already being implemented in the European Union. What about Latin America? What should be done? What can be done? What is realistic in order to ensure that there is a presence of local content in the streaming services? I'd like to open this up. Anybody, any one of the panelists that would like to reply or make a suggestion for policymakers to look at that may be feasible.
I'll go ahead.
No, Silvia,
Thank you, Giancarlo. So I think, or in the case of Colombia, we are getting a lot of Colombian content into the platforms. As I told you, those platforms are financing Colombian content. So they're producing series for produced and written by Colombians and acted by Colombians, financing them and getting to the platforms. And they do that because they want this audience, this Colombian audience and Latin American audience. So the market is regulating that. So when you have a market that works and that dictates how things should be done, I think you do not need like to have a policy of a quota to make something happen. Of course, you need to be careful and keep tracking what's going on, and if there's enough content, local content on the platforms. If not, then you have to start to intervene. But for now, in Colombia, at least, we are very happy of getting a lot of content in the platforms.
Okay, Giancarlo, do you want to comment?
Yes, I think it's hard to implement a quota now on the platform since when we didn't do it before into theaters. Okay, but I do think that I mean, going back to diversity, we've had some meetings with platforms, talked about different initiatives in order to increase the participation and the representation of women and indigenous groups and LGBT communities in those platforms, and to be able to build a win-win strategy where they can actually have an impact. I think what's important to understand is that platforms, what they need now is to have, I mean, we all know that they need more subscribers, and that means that they need an impact in each country. And the way to have an impact in each country is to look for those audiences that haven't been reached yet. Okay, and I think that's an essential point of diversity. There's a lot of niches, and not niches bigger or smaller, but there's a lot of audiences that haven't been reached on the previous traditional distribution system. And I think this is the perfect opportunity for both streaming platforms, social organizations, and public institutions to work and to actually build a system where those people and those audiences can be really rich, and that will make not only us stronger culturally, but it will also make the film industry economically more stronger.
I think you were mentioning me, Steve, even though you were muted, but I'm going to jump in. I think what's interesting about this discussion about quotas and streamers is if you step back and think about how different it feels these days to not very many years ago in terms of how content gets in front of consumers. The streamers have a very direct relationship with the consumers, with what we used to call audiences. You know, if they deliver to audiences content that audiences like, then they get more subscriptions, and their bottom line improves and their reach improves. And the streamers, I think, are a relatively efficient way of getting content made to consumers. You know, in the old paradigm of windows and theatrical, followed by, you know, video and then onto television in some form. That used to take a long time. With streamers, content is immediate, and for consumers, they tend to get a pretty strong choice. So I'm in favor of a kind of a demand pull approach to this rather than a supply push. I personally don't think governments should be trying to decide what content is actually put in front of consumers. What governments should do should be to strengthen the capability and capacity of local filmmakers and give them as much support as they possibly can, so that they can develop, content that is appealing and that tells the kind of stories from a cultural and economic perspective that people would like to hear. And the fact is that for filmmakers, another issue for governments to think about is to streamline the access and the communication between filmmakers and the streamers. The streamers want to reach out to filmmakers in the many countries around the world where they want to make content because they want subscribers. So you've got a very, very active, demanding and hungry customer, if you like, in these streamers. So what they want to do is get to know the local, the successful and quality and innovative content makers locally. So rather than put false regulations between the streamers and the content makers, like quotas, I think there's a better way of achieving the goal that they want to achieve, which is to work with local filmmakers, improving the quality and capability that they have, and then streamline the paths of communication between the content makers and the streamers.
Okay, very good. I'm going to, let me transmit a question, one of the questions which is related to, Jonathan, to what you were speaking about, which is the business model, or actually the public sector model, which has viewed the audiovisual industry as culture rather than an industry itself. The question from Luis Archundia is exactly how can we make not only the government, but also local film industry change the model to a business/industry revenue-oriented one. And I'm going to combine this with another question, which is not related, but in view of the lack of time, I want to create a kind of a block of questions and then open it up. Rodolfo Guzman from Jalisco is asking, what do you think of the recent case of the Netflix series Dark, where the local unions in Germany negotiated an agreement that requires the company to pay bonuses to the cast and production if it is very popular? Can we do that with Latino content? And finally, one other question I want to combine is from Ana Castillo, which is that, is it necessary for countries like Costa Rica with no big industry like Colombia to go through other Latin American countries in order to be considered in streaming platforms? So those are three questions, and it's open to all of our illustrious panelists.
I maybe about the Costa Rica question. I think this as a producer, my experience, as I was saying, is that they are looking for local impact. So they're not necessarily looking for the big hit, Latin American hit that will be a hit in every country in the region. But I mean, they're most probably looking also for a Costa Rican hit, a film that will have a strong impact in the country, so they can get subscribers in that country. So I think, I mean, whether you can co-produce with another country like Colombia or not, that's a different story. But I think that definitely the local content, it's something that can be very, very valuable for them.
Yeah, maybe just as a quick response to the Netflix series and the bonus paid in Germany. I'm a trained economist, so maybe don't hold me liable for whatever I comment now on the jurisdiction in Germany. But my my impression of the system is that some jurisdictions offer this kind of bestseller clauses, which basically give the creators an ability to at a later stage, when it is clearer how popular content may become, has become actually, to renegotiate. So that's maybe a hint, the only hint I can give as an economist.
I can pick up on a couple of these. Just talking about the dark example, where essentially there's a desire to have government regulation get involved to help the people in the industry, working in the industry on projects, or to in general add value. The incentive structures that operate around the world more and more are having additional bonus elements added to them if the production delivers additional value other than just the money that they're spending. So I'm sure this is the case in Colombia. I think I know it is, but you know, there is incentives can have requirements for certain training positions to develop workforce, or they can give bonus percentages of rebate. For example, if productions take place in a part of the country where in a region where the economy is suffering. So there's a number of ways to add these sort of levers to policies to gain these advantages. But I'll come back to the first question about the business model of filmmakers and the sort of the desire to change the conversation from cultural to economic. Personally, I don't want to change the conversation from cultural to anything else, to economic. I want to have the conversation embrace both cultural and economic benefit, because we have an industry that's relatively unique. It delivers benefits to both agendas. When 25, 30 years ago, when we started, the conversation with governments was about cultural benefits and not the economic side. But as years went by, we and governments realized, hang on, you know, when films or when content, audiovisual content is made in a country, about its people, about its heritage, about its locations and stories, and then when that material is seen around the world, that yes, there are cultural benefits, but there are also other benefits. The tourism, obviously screen tourism is talked about, other soft power benefits. So they were around that sort of cultural heritage, nation building side of things. But then as the economic benefits started to become more important and recognized, the economic agenda grew. And it was realized that if stories are made, you know, more commercial productions, let's say incoming international productions, are made in a country, they're still often made about a country, its people, its locations, its heritage, its stories, but at a bigger scale. And so you're still getting the economic benefits, but you're not losing the cultural benefits. But if policies stay with cultural agenda, you'll get the cultural benefits, but you won't maximize the economic benefits. And this is what's happened in the governments around the world that are doing well out of this industry. So the first message from me is don't try and break it down between culture on one side and economic benefit on the other. They actually are symbiotic and fit together very, very well. The other thing to say is that how do you change governments' minds? I said before, I was talking about evidence-based arguments, and those are very important. But then I think a message is to whoever is doing the lobbying, producers associations, film institutes, or whatever it may be, try and avoid the effort looking like it's a handout, that we're just, that we feel entitled to this kind of support, because it tends, in these difficult economic times, it doesn't work as well. You have to lay out what the cultural and economic benefits of supporting the sector are. And I think the conversation has changed in a lot of countries, and I think it's continuing to do so. And I think that's the case in Latin America too, a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. And I want to thank all of our speakers for their great contributions here. I think this has been an exciting webinar. And I want to mention two things to our listeners. One, if you have other questions, you may send them to us and we will direct them to the panelists and they may respond later, either by email or directly to you in another format. We're happy to do that. And also we are now open for other topics for future webinars. We're happy to receive suggestions, ideas, and depending upon the need, we would like to open that up for your suggestions. So I also want to thank all of our attendees here from all around Latin America and the US and Europe for participating. And once again, thank you, Giancarlo, Silvia, Jonathan, and Alexander for joining us. And have a good evening or good afternoon or good morning or wherever you are. On behalf of LATC and Olsberg SPI, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye, everybody. Great to meet you.